that we put in the vaccine. And in the 1920s, the start of the use of toxoids. Toxoids, as we all know, it comes from a toxin. The good example of this is your tetanus and your diphtheria vaccines. And this toxoid concept is inactivating the toxin. So because you cannot give the toxin to the patient as your antigen, so you have to inactivate that. So in the 1920s, the use of chemically inactivating them by the use of formaldehydes in vaccine actually is again an accident, no? That they were able to use this for good technology in the vaccines. And so the other major discoveries, no, the adding of the adjuvants by Gaston Ramon, and the use of the aluminum salts as the vaccine adjuvant. And so in the 1930s and in the 1950s, we now were able to grow these viruses, no, for your antigens in the embryonated eggs and also in cell cultures. In the 1970s, then, we now have the technology to combine all these different antigens into one vaccine. And a good example of this is your measles, mumps, rubella vaccine that was developed to minimize the total number of injections that you give to your infants. And then the clinical trials demonstrated that this combined antigen or different antigens can be effective and have an acceptable safety profile. So this is the one that we are using now. And the latest would be in the 1980s, the use of your split or subunit antigens, which means you don't put the whole pathogen in your vaccine, but cut them, no, into 4 or into 6, and then use just one unit of this virus or bacteria. And also in the 1980s, the use of recombinant DNA protein as the antigen. Now, the good example of this is your hepatitis B surface antigen that we use in our hepatitis B vaccine. Okay. So these discoveries that supported the progress is in the latest that we have now is the use of another protein to conjugate these polysaccharide vaccines that we all know the polysaccharide vaccines are not immunogenic in children less than 2 years of age. And so the use of conjugating them to another protein and also reassortment of these viral vaccines, which is combining the different genes of the different viruses, would enhance the immunogenic response for these vaccines. Okay, I know this slide is very busy, but you know that we have now 29 vaccines that are available or have been marketed. But locally, I know that we don't have them all yet. But in the future, I know that we have these more vaccines coming. And also these techniques, the techniques that were used in the development of this vaccine has given us the Nobel Prize awards in medicine for these people who were able to do or contribute to the vaccine technology. But there's also the challenge. Why do we need to have to use new technology in vaccines? Number one challenge is that in the very young or the naive population, we all know that some of them may not respond to your vaccines, like polysaccharide vaccines, and also the old ones, the elderly, because we know they have the immunosenescence. and also those patients with chronic conditions and immunodeficiencies. So these are the issues that we have to address and then tailor these vaccines, no, to give them the optimal response that they would need. So this afternoon, I'll be discussing just 3 vaccines that are used in GSK that have used the novel technology. The first one is your FEED-CV, which uses the NTHI active carrier protein B. Your HPV vaccine, which is adjuvanted to an AS04 adjuvant, and your human rotavirus vaccine, your live attenuated human rotavirus strain. So let's go to the PCV. We all know that it started, the pneumococcal vaccine started, no, as just the strep, using just the strep pneumoniae, which is the whole cell, using the polysaccharide of that strep pneumoniae, and which is the key antigen to protect against your strep pneumoniae disease. The use of carrier proteins, no, but have rendered this polysaccharide vaccine, so they were able to conjugate it, but these carrier proteins are actually just your passive proteins. So that means your vaccine is effective only for your strep pneumoniae and not for the passive carrier protein. Now, conjugating it, the polysaccharide to another protein, which is the protein D, which was derived from your non-typable Haemophilus influenzae, which is considered as highly conserved and is expressed in all of your H. influenza and your non-typable H. influenza strains. So this conjugation with the protein D with your non-typable Haemophilus influenzae has shown that it is also immunogenic to your non-typable Haemophilus influenzae. So it becomes a dual pathogen being addressed by your vaccine. One for your strep pneumoniae and the other is for the non-typable Haemophilus influenzae. So that benefit of this carrier protein show that it has good immunogenicity to all your strep pneumoniae serotypes. It minimizes the interference risk because if you use the common passive carrier like your CREM, it has shown that it has the risk of interference with your other co-administered vaccines. And it has a dual pathogen protection. The protection is derived not only for the strep pneumoniae, but also for the NTHI, or your non-typable Haemophilus influenzae. It has shown in the studies using the precursor FEED-CV, it has shown that there is an additional protection because we all know the NTHI is the one that is the most common cause of your acute otitis media in children. So it has shown that there is an overall reduction or vaccine efficacy of 34% for your FEED-CV, and especially for your NTHI-AOM with 35% reduction. New data, new clinical data with FEED-CV showing not only the AOM efficacy, but also your IPD, your invasive pneumococcal disease effectiveness. So these are the different continents that have been studied or have been using the vaccine and has shown IPD effectiveness, not only efficacy but real-time effectiveness of the vaccine. So as a summary for that first slide, in Finland, it has shown, because in Finland, they use the FIDCV vaccine as their part of their universal mass vaccination in children. So it has shown that from which started in 2008 and has shown that in 2011 that there's 83% decrease in IPD cases. Also in Kenya, which is in Africa, there's the IPD impact is 72% decrease in your vaccine type IPD. And in Brazil, the effectiveness of giving one or more dose of your FIDCV has efficacy of 71% against all IPD, and against the vaccine type IPD, it has even higher effectiveness at 85%. And also in Quebec, which is the latest that we had 42% decline in IPD comparing the Synflorix cohort, because in Quebec they started with VCV7 and then they continued with the FIDCV, and it showed a 42% decline in the IPD. Again, in Brazil, against CAP, or community-acquired pneumonia, not only IPD but the community-acquired pneumonia, it has shown 40% reduction in your CAP in those children who have completed the vaccine. And other early impacts report on pneumonia, meningitis, pneumonia hospitalizations, and the effectiveness of FIDCV following one or more doses against all serotypes, it has shown 71%, and against the vaccine serotypes, against 85%. And new clinical data show that consistent decrease of up to 70% in the overall IPD within the first year of introduction of FIDCV in these targeted groups. Okay, now let's go to another vaccine that has used the novel technology, your HPV vaccine, the composition of which is the HPV 16 and 18, which is adjuvanted to an AS04 adjuvant. The HPV bivalent vaccine uses the antigen not from the virus itself, but the VPL, or the virus-like particle, and combine it with an AS04 adjuvant using the combination of the aluminum salt and the MPL, which is proprietary for GSK. And this has shown strong immunogens, which means it maximizes the prevention of this cervical precancer and cancer related to the most prevalent oncogenic type, which is your 16 and 18. And it also enhances the immune response by through high and sustained level of immune response. So this data, the following data shows that it induces a higher and more persistent neutralizing antibody response. Here in the pink line is the vaccine, the bivalent vaccine using the adjuvant system, the AS04 adjuvant system. And it shows that it gives you the higher and more persistent because it persists for months. And the new data shows, before we had a study on the 8.3 years. Now we have the 9.4 years. So follow up with on mga patients that who were given the HPV vaccine and have shown that it is still very high in their level, both for your HPV 16 and HPV 18. There. Okay? And the antibodies, that the levels in the serum, which correlate with those in the cervicovaginal secretions in women, shows that, you know, that not all the antibodies are not only in your blood. the antibodies goes to your cervical vaginal secretions, which means that is where the area of HPV infection. Diba? That's why you can say that they are very good and they have a very high level even in the cervical vaginal area. Okay. Regarding cross protection of the vaccine, it enhances the overall vaccine efficacy. We all know that it's not only protecting from HPV 16 and 18, but also to the non-vaccine or the HPV types that are not in the vaccine, no, but they are the other oncogenic types. So this data show that for GSK vaccine, HPV vaccine, the overall vaccine efficacy is as high as 93%. So this graph will show you, no, will prove that in cases, dito po yung endpoint niya, the CIN3, in control and the vaccine groups, regardless of the HPV types. This is the control groups. These are the patients who were given the placebo vaccine. No, they were given another vaccine. And then the patients who were given the HPV 16 and 18. And it shows, so the difference there, so ito yung real measure of your efficacy. So it shows the up to 93% efficacy. Both with HPV 16 and 18 and the other non-vaccine type. And this table shows the strong cross-protection. Remember, the vaccine only contains your 16 and 18, but it has shown efficacy against the other oncogenic serotypes, which means these are the serotypes that also causes your cervical cancer. Okay? And most especially for HPV 45, which causes the adenocarcinoma, which is more invasive and more common even in younger children, and which shows 100% vaccine efficacy. So the benefits of adjuvanted HPV 16-18 vaccine is that it induces a higher immunity, it has a strong and sustained protection, and exhibits the broader cross protection. Now let's go to the last vaccine that uses the new novel technology, the human rotavirus vaccine. We all know that we put there, it's a live human rotavirus vaccine. So it contains the 11 human genes. This, the rotavirus that was used in the vaccine came from a 9-year-old female girl. And we know that the naturally occurring human strain, which replicates well in the gut, no? And it contains all the viral proteins because we use that in the vaccine, as you experience also in the natural infection. And so there's high level of similarity with proteins from the different strains. So even if you just put the monovalent strain, human strain in the vaccine, it shows, it provides heterotypic. So that means different serotypes, even if it is not in the vaccine. It has shown good protection against all of these, and even to possible emerging strains, like your G9. And the decrease in the diarrheal deaths, because in Mexico, they use the human rotavirus vaccine in their universal mass vaccination. And it has shown a very good reduction or decrease in diarrheal deaths, no, after the introduction of the vaccine. And it even shows that 29% in children are also protected, which shows the effect of herd immunity. Okay. What are the benefits of your human rotavirus vaccine in your vaccination schedule? Again, this is being given as a 2-dose vaccine, so you can provide early protection because as we have said, ano yung exam natin kanina, the contest, ano yung answer dun sa isang tanong, how young can you give how early, no? Can you give the rotavirus vaccine? As early as 6 weeks of life, and then followed by the second dose, which is 4 weeks apart, so you can have the baby protected by 10 weeks of age. And if you start at 10 weeks, then you can give it again on the 14th week. Okay, so there's a longer window of opportunity to vaccinate the patient because it's just 2 doses and greater flexibility of the widely defined age limits. And it has shown that among children vaccinated with the 2-dose vaccine, this is a data in the United States, they have the proportion that completed of the series was greater, 91%, versus those who were given the 3-dose vaccine. So, the benefits of a live attenuated human rotavirus vaccine has shown that it mimics the natural rotavirus infection because it's the live human strain. It provides cross protection, heterotypic protection. It has an additional benefit of your herd protection. So those babies who cannot be given the live vaccine, if your population is mostly vaccinated, then you can have the benefit of your herd protection. There's ability to provide early protection as early as 10 weeks of life. No? The babies can now be protected. So there's flexibility of dosing schedule and it provides good compliance. Knowing that we have more and more vaccines to be included in our routine vaccination. Okay, so all of these are checked. Okay, so we now know that the vaccines are one of the greatest achievements in our biomedical science and even public health programs. And the 29 diseases that are now currently preventable through vaccination will actually benefit more if we use the novel technology that would turn the science of immunology into high-quality, practical protection against these diseases. But it's nice to know that not only the efficacy but the effectiveness of the vaccine in real world. And it provides improved compliance, then the efficacy, and expand your coverage. You can give more vaccines. And so, the innovative vaccine technology will prevent more diseases and save more lives. Thank you very much for your attention.
To stretch those knees. So may I please invite everyone to please stand up. We're just gonna do a short exercise. It will be just a little more than a minute. Very simple steps.
And the icebreaker, let's finish our day with the last two topics. So our speaker earned her Bachelor in Science degree from UP Diliman and her medical degree from UERMNMC. She initially worked with industry and then joined the Department of Pharmacology and Toxicology of the UP College of Medicine as professional lecturer. She then joined the Food and Drug Administration, where she served as director from December 13, 2010 to June 8, 2012. As the head of FDA, she initiated engagements with advocacy groups on toys and cosmetic safety, international partners to improve the regulatory processes, and ensure that safe, effective, and quality products are allowed to be marketed in the Philippines in fulfillment of the FDA's mandate and purpose for existence. Let's again welcome her back today to talk on the topic Vaccine Safety Monitoring, Dr. Suzette H. Lazo.
Here is a very famous table. It shows the impact of vaccines on disease incidence. And if you look at the percent decrease, it's really very, very impressive. 100%, and the lowest in this particular data set is 95%. But this did not come without any pains. In 1957, there was an incident called the Cutter incident, C-U-T-T-E-R, whereby the company of that name failed in inactivating the polio virus. And so patients who received the vaccine actually got the disease with some mortality. And there was a massive investigation. The company was actually not found to be negligent because at that time, the technology was not very sophisticated, and so there was really the incapability that they could not inactivate. So they were not really closed. Instead, the company, I think, even grew bigger. And even with that scenario, vaccine went on to be popular. And so eventually they were able to improve the polio virus itself. So why is vaccine safety very important? And of course, undoubtedly, it's one of the greatest public health achievements. Vaccines are universally used all over the world. We need to monitor vaccine safety because we need to inform policy and also to build confidence in vaccines. Considering that the recipient of vaccines are healthy individuals, there's a very, very low tolerance for risks. And also, there's a need to find rare ADRs, especially the more serious ones. We also need to ascertain safety for special populations. I think this has been thoroughly discussed in many of the topics. That includes patients with chronic medical conditions, including those on cancer chemotherapy, pregnant women, and the elderly. This year, the WHO and CIUMS brought out this book, which I already mentioned in my talk yesterday. It's called Definition and Application of Terms for Vaccine Pharmacovigilance. And this contains the standardized definitions for the diagnosis of all the incidents related to the pharmacovigilance of vaccine. So I'm mentioning already vaccine safety and vaccine pharmacovigilance, no? And many of you probably also are conversant in pharmacovigilance. But let me borrow from this book so that we can zero in on vaccine pharmacovigilance and look at the definition. So vaccine pharmacovigilance is the science and activities relating to the detection, assessment, understanding and communication of adverse events following immunization and other vaccine or immunization-related issues, and to the prevention of untoward effects of the vaccines or immunization. This is a very, very close definition to how pharmacovigilance is also being defined by the World Health Organization. But vaccines differ from drugs. In general, they're more complex biologic products. I think the previous lecture showed you that indeed, as time goes on, we are going into a more highly technological area where better vaccines will probably, better, cleaner, and safer vaccines will probably be the result. As already mentioned, vaccines target high populations of birth cohorts, and we know the benefits of immunizations are not immediately visible because they're meant to protect. The optimal schedule protects age of greatest risks, but targeted ages may coincide with emergence of underlying disease. That's why we had a lot of talk about certain substances and vaccines, substances in the vaccines, and the vaccine itself being linked with autism, for instance. There are subpopulations which may be more susceptible to AEFIs. And the causality assessment, compared to that of the assessment being conducted when there are adverse drug reactions or adverse events associated with the use of drugs, are complicated by the inability to use the challenge, because once you give a vaccine, you have to follow the schedule. You cannot remove that anymore or even re-challenge, no? And health professionals who recognize and report AEFIs often are not the same as those who gave the vaccines. In our situation here, underreporting is a problem. And we have to make the landscape whereby we do not have a culture of pointing fingers, because that's the reason why many doctors really do not want to report or are hesitant to report, because it may open up more problems for them. And also, we need to improve the systems for reporting of AEFIs. Let's take a look at vaccine development and how safety is being undertaken in these various stages of development. During the preclinical stage, you have laboratory, basically animal data. So the laboratory may be in vitro and maybe even at the submolecular level now, considering that we already have these particles and subunits in our vaccine armamentarium. And so, from the time that a rationale is developed to the identification of the immunogen, there's been a lot of work put into this, laboratory and animal studies. Then you need to develop your manufacturing process, because just like in the Qatar incident that I mentioned, actually the problem was in the manufacturing process. So you need to ascertain that what you manufacture is in compliance with quality specifications, and also that the results are reliable and reproducible. And of course, you have non-clinical studies in animals to look at the effects in terms of safety and the efficacy also. Then, if the product candidate passes the initial preclinical stage, it now goes into the clinical stage of development. And here we have the various phases of clinical trials. Yesterday, for instance, you've seen the report of the dengue vaccine, which is basically a phase 2. you know, even the phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 are now undergoing an evolution. So you have phase 1B, you have phase 2A or phase 2B, and you even have a phase 0. Actually, there's a phase 0 clinical trials. When the product is able to comply with the standards and the evidence of efficacy is being met, then it is licensed as a vaccine product, after which there is still post-market surveillance that should be conducted. Why? For the simple reason that phase 1 to 3 trials are conducted on sample size of patients that are not large enough to find the serious but rare adverse events. Compared to drug trials, vaccine trials are invariably bigger in sample size. No? But still, it's not sufficient to really detect serious but rare adverse events. Therefore, a post-marketing surveillance is mandatory, and this will be discussed later. Basically, it's being conducted for the purpose of identifying rare reactions that will be discussed after me by Dr. Pagkatipunan. So, now you have a vaccine product which is in use. How do we know that the vaccines are safe? Do we have a way of measuring that this is really safe? You have hints of this in your practice when you look at your patients and find that they're okay, no? Because there's really no direct measurement for us to say that it's very unsafe. We can only depend on the number of adverse events reported. And by definition, an adverse event is a medical incident that takes place after vaccination and is believed to be caused by vaccination. So the perception is there, but the proof is still not. That's why it's just called an event and not an ADR or an adverse drug reaction. And adverse events include the true reactions to the vaccines or the vaccine-induced adverse events. They also include events that would have occurred even if the patient had not yet been vaccinated, what we call as the coincidental event. They also include reactions related to mistakes in vaccine preparation or administration. And those on the field are very familiar with these programmatic error, because this is so preventable. That's why we have to be very, very aware. Events that cannot be related directly to the vaccines is called the unknown. And lately, there's been also an additional, because there used to be 4 of these classifications only. But it's recognized that because of anxiety or even pain, there are certain events that may follow, like syncope. So this is the injection reaction. Now, vaccine reactions can be caused by many things, either the active component of the vaccine itself, the preservative, or the stabilizer. Once a vaccine, however, has undergone preclinical and clinical studies and has been approved for marketing, we know that the vaccine reactions that are common are mild, usually related to the injections. And the serious ones are very rare and are usually of a fairly predictable and very low frequency. Now, this has also been discussed already. There are errors that can lead to AEFIs or adverse events following immunizations. Too much vaccine given in one dose, improper immunization site or route, syringes and needles improperly sterilized, vaccine reconstituted with incorrect diluent, the wrong amount of diluents used, and the drug inadvertently substituted for vaccine or diluents. This has been well discussed, including in the experts forum. And there's more, more of the same. Now, let's go to how we can really conduct the vaccine safety surveillance. And there are 3 steps that are essential to this. The first is to detect the signal. Second is to develop the hypothesis. And the third will be to really test the hypothesis. So how do we detect signals? First, you have the passive, also known as the spontaneous reporting, whereby healthcare providers submit to the regulatory authority reports of adverse events. In the Philippines, the FDA is the one that receives these reports, although as I already mentioned, we need to have a specific vaccine reporting system that includes crafting the form for this. The DOH's EPI has a national AEFI committee which handles AEFIs coming from DOH's service areas. And the committee sits to discuss serious adverse events that happen and pursue investigations and attempt to go into causality assessments. Another method of detecting signals is reactive, whereby you're more directed in answering a specific health risk. This we are not able to do at the moment because, as you know, sometimes when reports come, there's so many important data that is lacking. In the US, they have what is called as the VSD data link, whereby the FDA and the CDC are linked with the biggest HMOs, with 8 of the biggest HMOs in the US, that includes Kaiser Permanente. So they're able to dig up the records, and so they're able to really make causality correlations. The purpose of AEFI investigation is to confirm, number 1, the reported diagnosis of AEFI and clarify the details and outcome. Now with the CIOMS WHO standardization definition, we can now standardize this, and it will be better from the global point of view. The second is to determine whether unimmunized persons are experiencing the same medical event. The third is to investigate the link between the vaccine given and the AEFI. The fourth is the contribution of operational aspects of the program to the reported AEFI. Fifth is to determine whether a reported event was isolated or part of a cluster. And sixth, to determine the cause of the AEFI so as to provide the best intervention and medical care and take any further action deemed necessary. The eventual goal of vaccine pharmacovigilance is to learn from adverse events that happen so that they do not get repeated again. In that way, lives will be saved and patients will be spared. If they will not die, at least be spared from the outcome. So when you are investigating, there are data that need to be collected as part of the process of investigation. And this data includes patient data like demographics, history of past illness, immunization history, laboratory results, some of the cases whereby the causality has been assessed, has been really ascertained, is the isolation, for instance, of the strain used in the vaccine. So, autopsy report and all those. So the more data you can gather, the better. There's also data on the vaccine that needs to be collected, and this is the standard lot number, expiration date, manufacturer, vaccine storage. And so from the experts forum, there was a question about aspirating some more. And it was mentioned that, it's going to be difficult because of the, it's gonna make the next vial run short. I was also thinking that in this sense, it's going to also be very difficult to do an investigation if you're using samples from mixed syringe. Then you also need to also get the program-related data, like the storage and handling, and the other background data. So did the vaccine or the delivery cause the reactions? What's important here is to really ascertain a causal association between the vaccine and the adverse event. So you have to take into consideration the consistency of the findings. Are all reported AEFIs the same? The temporal sequence, and the biological plausibility. Does the medical event seem plausible due to an effect of the vaccine? We should also take note of previously known reactions. Check if this type of reaction is known to be related to the vaccine. And also specificity and strength of association to establish if the same events are being reported in unvaccinated persons. And of course, concomitant or preceding conditions. From the SIOM's WHO book is this algorithm on the steps that can help in trying to ascertain whether the AEFI is due to a program error, manufacturer error, perhaps a real vaccine reaction, and other things. So I would urge you to download this book and study it in more detail due to the interest of time that we have now. In the same book, you also have this algorithm on vaccine failures, because in pharmacovigilance, treatment failure is considered an adverse event. There might be an underlying problem, for instance, on quality problems associated with the product. And we have a big brother, which is the WHO, to help us develop our capability or capacity building towards a more competent pharmacovigilance. They're also helping the other low and middle income countries. And this year they launched the Global Vaccine Safety Initiative, and the blueprint includes the strengthening of national vaccine pharmacovigilance capacities and sharing methodologies, among other things. So we are in the 21st century, and as I said, it's a global system. While acting locally, we should look outwards to the global and use what is in there. And the global capacity building and harmonization tools are based on the work of the WHO and its partners, specifically in the definitions, the Brighton collaboration, also working with SIOMS. You also have other national AEFI surveillance, investigation, and response, whose programs are probably similar to ours. I think we're doing a great job here with our vaccines, and I would like to congratulate PFD for this effort. You also have Uppsala, the blue side, that's the archive for the database. And of course, we should not leave out industry, because that's where the source of the supply is coming from. And they are also endeavoring to put out better vaccines, now using technology to do this. So, if you're looking at the data, all the data on safety monitoring, who looks at all that data? I dare say that probably the global master house or the global clearing system for all the data is the US Institutes of Medicine, which is part of the National Academy of Science. It's a non-profit, non-governmental organization made up of volunteer. Of course, they get nominated. And they have the gold standard in vaccines. The book that they recently published, Adverse Effects of Vaccines, Evidence and Causality, is a compilation of all causality assessments that they have made. And I would like to share with you and give you just a bird's eye view of how they do this. This is the algorithm that they use in assessing causality. There are two streams that they use, specifically the use of epidemiologic data, which is the controlled clinical trials in adequately sized populations of patients. You also have the what they call the mechanistic data derived from case reports, animal data, even the preclinical data that looks at the mechanisms of actions. Okay? That's why it's called mechanistic. And they have devised weighted scores for this, taking into consideration all of this. For instance, case reports can be very, very strong if they are well documented. The demonstration, the isolation, for instance, of viral strain used in the vaccine preparation is one such evidence. And if there are certain criteria, for the weight of the epidemiologic evidence is categorized as high, which is the increased risk, increased or decreased risk, for instance, in association with a certain adverse event. You have a moderate, limited, and sufficient. On the other hand, the mechanistic, they rate it as strong, intermediate, weak, and lacking. And this is how they do this. So, looking at the epidemiologic assessment, if they rank it high, and that is also paired with a mechanistic assessment of strong, the causality conclusion, which is the highest, is to say, and this is new, no? Because before we're just used to possible, remember, probable, and all that, and likely, but this is something new. It means convincingly supports. On the other hand, moderate for epidemiologic and intermediate from mechanistic will redound to the phrase called favors acceptance. The other categories include favors rejection and finally inadequate to accept or reject. So there are 4 categories, and if you look through the book, it's all there. The information is all there on all the vaccines in the world and all the risks with which it is implicated. So I would again urge you to download this book. So finally, in summary, good pharmacovigilance, best practices. The endeavor of pharmacovigilance is not just about safety reporting, but encompasses much more. It includes clinical case management and research, and also population-based surveillance and research, from signal detection, hypothesis testing, and also background incidents in populations. The causality assessment paradigm answers the question, or provides the evidence to say that did a certain vaccine cause an adverse event. If you notice the categories, it does not mention, while it favors rejection, it's a rejection that is very self-limited, because there's a phrase in science that we use: absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So it's really very difficult to rule out anything. It's much easier to establish a linkage. Finally, pharmacovigilance and vaccine safety also needs stakeholder communications, and that has been very well discussed in all the lectures. And finally, in vaccines, as Dr. Lulu says, we don't know anything, so we continue to build capacity. Thank you very much.
Okay, finally, now we're on our discussing about post-marketing surveillance for vaccines. How many among you doctors have participated in a post-marketing surveillance? Taas po ang kamay. Wala. Ayun. Yung nakita ko yung mga matatanda. Mga friends ko yun. Okay. So, we have this post-marketing surveillance for vaccines. As we all know, we are doing surveillance for after use of vaccine. So, I will just discuss about what, why, and how of the post-marketing surveillance, because you doctors can be involved in this activity. So what is a PMS? Hindi ito yung post-menstrual, wala na ho ako nun eh. Pero this is a surveillance activity, no, under normal practice condition. That means under your normal practice, di ba? Nabavaccinate tayo sa ating clinic, di ba? So under your normal practice conditions, there is a surveillance of which after the product is marketed, that means it has been licensed. That is to document its safety and tolerability in the administered population. Also defined, or another definition, is a formal investigation conducted for the purpose of assessing the clinical safety of these marketed medicines in your clinical practice. So this is not only for vaccines, but also for the drugs that we use. I know that we are all aware of the adverse drug reaction form, di ba ho? Yung, yung tawag na, anong kulay ng form na ginagamit natin pag ADR? Anong kulay? Hindi nyo alam. Red, di ba? Pag yung red form, sinabi, oh, may ADR. You use the red form to report the adverse drug reaction. Now, in vaccines, we also have that. Di ba? Sa lecture ni Dr. Lasso, that we do reporting for adverse events following immunization, or the AEFI. Now, the PMS is safely monitoring the method carried out after the licensure, and then it is either informal or formal passive surveillance, or spontaneous or active surveillance that was mentioned earlier. That is on medical events following vaccination. And this is where your other stakeholders like the industry are involved, because they are the ones, or the vaccine manufacturers will also have to maintain to do a post-marketing surveillance for their products, which are then, this report are then forwarded to our national regulatory authorities, or the FDA. So why do we do the PMS? Why do we have to do it? Now, actually, the vaccine manufacturers are mandated to do the PMS because it is a regulatory requirement. Next, because certain adverse reactions may not have emerged in the pre-licensure studies. Ano yung nakikita nyo dun sa product insert ng ating vaccines? Diba? There's the generic name of the product, and then after that, diba, meron siyang composition, hanggang kung binabasa nyo yun, binabasa nyo ho? Okay? Kung binabasa nyo yun, meron siya sa next page ng mga possible adverse events that are expected. Diba? So this recording of adverse events are based on the pre-licensure studies. Now, if this is a new product, most of these adverse events noted in that product insert are pre-licensure studies. But these are being updated. Kasi pag nagamit na yung product or na-market na yung product and there have been post-marketing surveillance done, so they update this product insert to include sometimes the results of your post-marketing surveillance. Okay. Next is there is no artificial constraints or strict inclusion and exclusion criteria because you enroll the patient as they come. Diba? Naturally, kasi magpapabakuna naman sila, so they will be enrolled in your natural clinical practice. And so this can help in quantifying the incidence of known undesirable effects. Now, again, another reason for doing the PMS is because it was mentioned earlier by Dr. Lasso that there's a higher standard of safety expected in immunization than with other medicines. We all know because we give vaccines to healthy individuals. And also due to the large number of people who are exposed to the vaccine. Because we use vaccines for our public health, programs, and even the population that is, the vaccine is recommended is bigger. Lahat ho, diba? All children, all elderly, ganun ho, diba? So we have more number of people who will be exposed to the vaccine. And thus, this is to investigate the possible causes of much rarer adverse events in the real population, not in the clinical trial. So yun ho yung gusto nating malaman, why we do post-marketing. Why again? What are the other reasons? Establishing associations of adverse events. Remember, Dr. Alaso said, there should be an investigation after an adverse event, no? So marami pong reasons why and then we have to classify them, the adverse event, no? So promptly defining the attributable risks are very critical to understanding the risk and benefit perspective of the use of the vaccine. Sino nakakaalala ng thalidomide effect na nangyari? Anong nangyari after the use of the thalidomide in pregnant women? Yung focomelia, yung wala silang kamay at paa, at amelia, as in totally wala silang lahat. That was actually not reported during the pre-clinical trial when the use of the drug was being done. So after that, kasi diba, indicated siya for pregnant women. So what happened? After the use of the drug, ginagamit na siya, ano nangyari? Lahat ng mga, hindi naman lahat, majority of the babies were affected. That's why it was the use of your post-marketing survey, due to the use of the post-marketing surveillance, that's why we have to put out the drug from the market or maybe change the indication of the drug. Okay, so that is one benefit of that. You have to know the risk of a possible side effects versus the benefit of giving the drug or the vaccine. And next is the erroneous association of this risk can undermine the confidence in the vaccine. and have disastrous consequences of vaccine acceptance and disease incidents. Again, if we narinig lang natin, ganon, uy, pagkatapos ng mabakunahan, nasagasaan siya. Is it due to the vaccine? Depende. Depende nga ho. That's why you have to investigate. But if the media got that word, di ba, ano mangyayari? Naku, hindi na pwedeng gamitin yung bakuna kasi nasasagasaan kayo pagkatapos. No? So, that would really have a disastrous consequence because that vaccine will be very good, di ba? Kanya lang, because of the negative implication, nagkakaroon ng bad, no? Yung akala nila that the risk is there. Pag nabakunahan, masasagasaan. Okay, so hindi yun yung isang reason why we do this surveillance. And also vaccines are mandated for public health reasons, and the vaccine, no vaccine is perfectly 100% safe, no? And there are two types of your post-marketing surveillance. It's either passive or active. Parang immunization, di ba? May active and passive immunization. Okay, now for PMS, your passive are those that are spontaneously reported, and your active is like a study. No? It's actually considered a phase 4 clinical trial. Okay, yung passive reporting, I will not dwell much on how it is really being done, but just for you to have an idea, so that if you will be approached for a possible post-marketing surveillance, no, as an investigator or a clinical trialist, you will know why it is being done and how it is being done. We have the AEFI. Dr. Lasso told us about the form. No, this has the same channel as those for the ADRs or the ones used for your drugs. There is a narrative description of the event. The patients and their parents are actually permitted to report. So it's not only the doctor, diba, to report it, but usually the parents of the patient na binigyan nyo ng vaccine, who will report it to the doctor, and then you, the doctor, will report it. The reports are actually of serious or any unexpected ADRs. And then because locally we have a regulatory requirement for new vaccines, no, that are marketed to do the post-marketing surveillance for at least 2 years or if we reach 3,000 subjects. So this is just an example of the form that is being used in the United States. They call it the VAERS, or the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. So hopefully now we will have this in our public, but in our private, no, as the industry, they have their own forms. So again, this is just the definition of what I just put it here so that you will know what to report. So any adverse event following immunization. Event, so any event. Yun nga ho, pag nabakunahan tapos nasagasaan, i-report nyo ba yun? Yes or no? Okay, you have to know. Kasi maraming reasons yun. Diba? O pag, binakunahan nyo, for example, sa adult, binakunahan nyo, tapos pinaalis nyo na agad sa clinic nyo. Sige, alis na kayo, pwede na kayong umuwi. Ngayon pala, nahilo-hilo siya, tapos, lumabas sa kalye, at natumba sa kalye, nasagasaan. No? Pero hindi yun yung nasagasaan itself. But again, it's an event. So, anything that is very unusual, or that is causally, temporally related because of the timing. Okay? These are just So how it is being done? We also have, the first one is the passive that I told you about, that you report any spontaneous reporting of these events. And then the other one is the phase 4, we call the phase 4 surveillance studies or post-licensure clinical trials. These are the trials that are being done by the industries, no? Because they want to look on the possible effects, like number one, or effects of the changes in their vaccine formulation. Because the vaccine has already been marketed and they had the different formulations, so they have to do post-surveillance or post-licensure clinical trials. They also have the different vaccines, use of different vaccine strains, ages at vaccination, the number of timing of vaccine doses, simultaneous administration, or interchangeability from different manufacturers. And this they do because they want to detect the adverse events that are not detected during the pre-licensure trials. Again, when we say, we don't have data on interchangeability of the different vaccines, of the same antigen. So some industries may want to do post-licensure clinical trials on doing interchangeability. So in the future, we will know if these two vaccines can be interchangeable. So we have guidelines for doing PMS, or the post-marketing surveillance. One is from the European source. It must be ethical and scientifically valid. It should represent the real use of the vaccine. It has to be separate from the prescribing decision from the study entry. It must not be promotional in nature, because this is just your natural practice, clinical practice. Should encourage the liaison between the sponsor and the regulator, which means the sponsor is the industry and then the regulator is the FDA. Okay? So they have to report it and have the results published. Because if they find it non-favorable, it still has to be published. So what are the good features? So what are the effects or good effects of having this PMS? It has detected unrecognized potential reactions and data to evaluate whether these events are causally linked to the vaccine. As I have mentioned earlier, to the other drugs, it has served as a source of cases for further investigation because you report it, actively report it. It may also answer the routine public queries, or sometimes, it addresses your concerns. So when you report it, it will be addressed. And then it evaluates the changes in the reporting rates over time, or when the new vaccines replace the old vaccines. Remember, like yung OPV, we have shifted to IPV. So we would like to see what is the effect of that in the real world scenario. It also provides additional assurance about the safety of the new drug. That's why the companies would always update you through their medical education on the newest studies after the use of the vaccine for so many years, for the longest time, for the different age group. So they do this. And the drug prescribed as the best clinical judgment of the doctor. Then there should be no constraints from sponsor on the selected criteria because these are your patients. Okay? Not the ones that you recruit. Because these the patients that you use in post-marketing surveillance are your real patients. Okay? So these are the references that I have used in this lecture. If you have further questions, actually, you can really approach us with that. Okay, thank you very much, and have a safe trip home.
With us from morning till now. So we have reached the end of our lecture. A warm round of applause for everyone for having stayed until now. Synopsis of day 2, which we started this morning with Attorney Carandang giving us the basics on the child's right. Indeed, it's everyone's right to health and vaccination, in which he mentioned about laws that mandate vaccination and that we can actually demand for this, for vaccines, and it's just a matter of the realization of this. Then we went on to Dr. Coronel talking about updates on the immunization in adults and elderly, especially when she talked about new vaccines which are not yet locally available, like the live attenuated influenza vaccine and the varicella zoster vaccine. And then Dr. Montalban then went on to talk about the immunization for recommendations for healthcare workers, which I'm sure all of you are very interested in. Dr. Santos also followed up with the immunization recommendations in pregnant women, especially emphasizing that the best time for these women of any of the reproductive age group to get the vaccines are before pregnancy. And then we had the Dr. Pagkatipunan mini symposium because she handled 3 sessions. So she talked about new vaccines, especially with the newer vaccines that are in the pipeline, dengue vaccine, the TB vaccine, and your HIV or AIDS vaccine. And we had a very, very animated panel discussion with all the vaccine experts, not just the speakers of the morning, but everyone else in the group that was facilitated by Dr. Bravo, which I hope was able to answer all your burning questions and vaccine concerns. Then this afternoon, our final symposium was on vaccine safety, wherein Dr. Lazo outlined the most important components of pharmacovigilance in her lecture on vaccine safety monitoring. And finally, we ended again with Dr. Pagkatipunan, again outlined how post-marketing surveillance of vaccines are done. So we have covered everything from the basics of vaccine to updated recommendations to vaccine safety issues. And if there's anything else that we have not yet covered in this training course, then we would probably want to invite you again to the next sessions of the Philippine Foundation for Vaccination. So just stay tuned. As we said, lectures will be uploaded to the website at www.philvac.org by next week. So with that, I'd like to end. Before we end and before we go to our closing ceremonies, I'd like to call on Dr. Jonathan Lim to announce the winners of the Brain Vac Challenge.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for staying. Now is one of the, let's say, the highlights of the this afternoon, which will be the draw. First, we'll go with the drawing of the raffle for the feedback form. We'll be giving out again 2 USBs, just like this morning. And the lucky raffle stubs will belong to Rebecca Buanzon from Baguio Health Department.
Thank you, Doc. Thank you.
And another winning raffle stub would go to Russell Ibos, a nurse. Congratulations. Okay, now we go to the Brain Vac Challenge. Okay, for the Brain Vac Challenge, we have 63 entries. And of the 63 entries, we only have 1 who got the perfect score. So that one person will automatically win the biggest prize available as shown here on stage. So maybe Sonia can model and walk around with a prize. So this is not a Samsung S3 or iPhone, but it's a Cherry Mobile B12 TV. So that will go to the one and only delegate who was able to get a perfect score of 15, granting he or she is here. Otherwise, I'll take that home with me. The lucky winner is, I don't know if she's a doctor, a nurse, a medtech, a midwife, but she is Nora Genevieve Recolizado. She's a doctor, okay. Okay, she's a pediatrician. Is she here? Wala na. Iuwi ko na talaga to. Counting once, Nora Genevieve Recolizado. Going twice. Uwi ko na siya. Sige. Wala talaga. Okay. Now, we have... By the way, would you like me to go through the answers or hindi na? Yes? Sige. Okay lang ba? Agree? Okay. Age for DPP vaccine to be given? B, C, or D? Anyway, with the rain, the answer would be B, okay? The third is influenza vaccine. The first dose will be given as young as A, B, C, or D. Wala akong narinig, but anyway. Okay, it's 6 months old. B or D? B, okay, as in Dr. Bravo. Vaccine is A, B, C, or D? D. This number of DPP containing vaccines. A, B, C, or D? And then their second dose between 4 to 6 years old. Now, and meningitis. A, B, C, D? A? May missing ba na A? Varicella vaccine protects one from which of these diseases? Protect you from German measles or smallpox. Vaccine or vaccines which may be given to a newborn. Can't hear you. But anyway, remember in your nursery before discharge, B. The recommended number of doses of chickenpox vaccine for a child. A. Live oral polio vaccine may be given together with live may non-true, may non-trolls, call center for the oral polio, and they go to the, and then you want to give the oral rotavirus vaccine. Okay. And last, BCG is administered continuously. A, intradermally kasi dapat. So, we had that one winner, the pediatrician, so 9 are here. So, second. This is a coffee maker. So this is Dr. Jessica Joy Ramonlete. So si Dr. mahilig daw sa kape, so that's good. Congratulations, Doctor. And the name. Okay. This, I don't know if the profession of this person, this is Linon or Linon Escoton. Linon, yeah, congratulations. Congratulations, sir. Okay, let's have 2 more prizes. I just draw it in the interest of time. We have Sofael Ilaw RN. Yes, congratulations. Nagobiyaan ba kayo? Winner, okay. Congratulations. And the last prize is a water heater. We have a doctor, a pediatrician. Okay, we have from Notre Dame. Dr. Gina Ko, is she in the house? Wala. Going once. Going twice. Wala. And the last but not the least, hopefully nandito siya. Ederlina Kalyangan, a pediatrician. Aba, all from the table. So congratulations, Doctora. So basically that ends our Bring Back Challenge, and congratulations to all the winners. I hope we're able to jar your brain with those questions. Okay, so congratulations. And I'll give the mic back to Isa.
To thank everyone for supporting the Philippine Foundation for Vaccinations Philippine National Immunization Conference, especially the delegates. Actually, according to Dr. Bravo, the Executive Supervisor, I mean the Executive Director, and Dr. May Monteliano, this is the first time that we had 307 delegates attending the immunization conference. And because of this, I think it's time to announce, Doctora, when is the next immunization conference, because everybody is very interested? Okay, so the next immunization conference will be the Asian Vaccine Congress. That will be on June in Cebu. So you have your flyers, so you check. And from there, we will be announcing, or the PFB will be announcing where the next PNIC conference will be. So the next thing I would like to thank is also the PFB officers, our speakers who came all the way from Manila and other parts of the Philippines, who took time and effort and money to come over to share their expertise. And most of all, the organizing committee who could not say no to my request in becoming members, even if they were very busy with their private practice, their teaching courses, they were here to support. And all the people who are behind this, like Ma'am Leia, Tita Gemma, Ma'am Mel, Kuya Miguel, who were very supportive of us. Of course, I will not like to forget all our partners in the industry who also supported. I wish I could thank everyone, just so that the time will be killed hanggang dumating yung music. So, ayun, dumating yung music. So, actually, this is my chance to say thank you so much, everyone. And if you would like to accept the challenge of being vaccine advocates, so that we will show these bacteria and viruses we are more intelligent after all than them, by preventing emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases. Thank you very much, everyone. Please stay, because the next presentation will show you the winners of the Hataw Galaw. If you remember yesterday, Dr. May Monteliano told us this was part of her presentation, that we had Hataw Galaw, a dance competition.
So Joy sa puno niya.
Okay, so they truly deserve first place, don't you think? So they won 30,000 pesos. So that's our goal, to have all our kids end up like them, no? Fully immunized, healthy, for a healthier Philippines.
The Vice President of the Philippine Foundation for Vaccination, Dr. Shelly De La Vega. Is she here? Shelly? Come on up. Dr. Senya Fabay proved us right. It's more fun in Baguio, right? It's really more fun in Baguio to have this Philippine National Immunization Conference held here, and what a successful one it is.
Thank you very much. Dr. Lulu Bravo is very emotional, of course. This is something that's very close to her heart. And as we know, we cannot move people unless we move their hearts too. And I think she and the PFB has been very successful together with Dr. Pabay's group. Maybe we can have the PFB chapter here. I don't know. I'm jumping the gun on that. But I think what we have been able to achieve here is something akin to a winner of the Panagbenga Festival. No? We have a variety of flowers, of talents, of passions, and of experts, no, that came together for this immunization conference to make it highly educational, very highly convincing to those of us who work with persons who need to be vaccinated, and most importantly, a lot of fun. Just like Baguio is, a lot of fun for us from Manila who came up here, and of course for you, I'm sure, who have participated, I'm sure you also had a lot of fun. So I hope this is just a beginning. Please make sure that you contact us through our experts here in Baguio, and also through our email, as we have mentioned earlier, if you wish to partner with us for vaccine advocacy, educational campaigns, etc. Many thanks, of course, to Dr. Pabay's group, and I will not name everyone. Please, if you wish to come up, we would like you to come up, to stand up, to be acknowledged, and of course our PFB officers, workers, members, thank you very much. A warm applause again to everyone. Thank you.